In the middle of the vast ocean, a small plane suddenly lost its pilot after a sudden heart attack. The radio wasn't working, the GPS was dead, and a massive storm was already waiting ahead. The only person controlling the plane was a woman who wasn't even a professional pilot. While the fuel kept running low and no land was visible anywhere, the two people inside the plane had to survive with whatever abilities they had before it was too late. Sometime earlier, a woman and a man were seen sitting casually while having drinks together at a small bar by the beach. The couple was Sarah and Jackson, who were enjoying a vacation on a tropical island called Mauritius Island. The atmosphere that night was actually quite calm, but Jackson looked gloomy. He was sad because Sarah had to return to London first for work. Sarah herself really disliked moments of separation. Because of that, she forbade Jackson from taking her to the airport. Jackson, who tried to hold back his feelings, then ordered 2 more bottles of beer before going to the restroom. However, while Jackson was still in the restroom, Sarah secretly left the place and went straight to the airport to return to London without saying goodbye. Time then passed until 1 year later. Now Sarah was already in London and planned to go back on vacation to Mauritius Island. Coincidentally, her female friend would be holding a wedding on the island. Besides attending the event, Sarah also intended to meet Jackson again, whom she hadn't seen since the incident a year ago. Not long after, Sarah finally arrived back in Mauritius. After arriving there, she immediately went to the house of her friend, named Solomon. She intended to take some drink supplies for her stock while staying on the island.
I'll be back to see you again soon.
After that, Sarah continued her trip to the house of Pascal, her female friend. From a distance, Sarah saw Jackson, who seemed to have just finished diving. Jackson was walking with a woman. Seeing that, Sarah felt curious and asked Pascal about who the woman was. Pascal explained that the woman was only Jackson's diving friend.
That's a good... Yeah.
That night, the beach atmosphere looked crowded. Many people gathered while enjoying a small party before Pascal's wedding. In the middle of the crowd, Sarah tried to greet Jackson. However, Jackson looked awkward and quite cold. He still seemed disappointed because Sarah had left just like that a year ago without saying goodbye. Jackson even chose to keep his distance from Sarah. Feeling guilty, Sarah eventually followed Jackson and tried to apologize for what had happened in the past. At first, Jackson still looked annoyed, but after hearing Sarah's explanation, he finally forgave her. That night they spent time together, and the atmosphere between them slowly warmed up again.
Ambition of yours rubbed off. That's the wrong...
The next morning, Sarah woke up in shock because she had woken up too late. She was supposed to have already left for Pascal's wedding location. Since her friends had already gone earlier, Sarah decided to go to the house of her friend named Freddie, who would also attend the wedding. Freddie planned to go using his private plane. When Sarah arrived at Freddie's house, she noticed that Freddie didn't look very healthy. Even so, they still prepared to leave.
I know. Don't get any... Thank you for taking...
Only passage.
Not long after that, Jackson suddenly arrived and decided to go to Pascal's wedding with them. At that moment, Jackson was a bit annoyed with Sarah because earlier that morning, she had left without telling him.
Approximately 9 minutes. No, it's gonna get loud.
The plane finally took off. Once they were in the air, Freddie asked Sarah, who had once learned how to fly a plane with him, to sit in the co-pilot seat. Sarah initially refused because she felt her abilities were still very limited, but Freddie kept convincing her that she could help. Not long after that, Freddie started coughing badly. Suddenly, Freddie had a heart attack.
It's okay. Take these. Take these. It's okay. Jack!
His body immediately passed out and fell onto the control lever, causing the plane to dive sharply downward. In a panic, Sarah asked Jackson to quickly lift Freddie's body off the controls while she tried to take over the plane. At that moment, the plane was almost hitting the surface of the ocean. With the little calm she had left, Sarah tried to pull the controls with all her strength. At the last second, the plane managed to climb back up before touching the sea. After things became a little more stable, Jackson checked Freddie's condition. Unfortunately, Freddie had already died from the heart attack.
Come on.
His body was then moved to the back of the plane and covered with Jackson's jacket. Jackson then returned to the front and sat next to Sarah. With a tense voice, Jackson asked if Sarah could really fly the plane. Sarah replied that she had indeed learned before, but only briefly, so her experience was very minimal. Hearing that, Jackson started to panic even more. Their panic increased when they realized that some of the buttons on the plane were not working. The plane's GPS and radio were also broken, so they had no idea where they were. Jackson tried to use the GPS on his phone, but the battery was already dead. They were completely confused about which direction to fly. Finally, Jackson tried to make a simple compass and suggested that they fly south. Sarah was hesitant, but in the end, Sarah followed Jackson's direction. While continuing to fly, they tried to turn on the plane's radio to look for help, but not a single frequency connected. The situation became even more tense when a massive storm cloud began to appear in front of them that they had to pass through. In the middle of that tension, suddenly the radio managed to connect with someone. That person was Samuel, one of Freddie's friends. Sarah and Jackson immediately explained that Freddie had died from a heart attack and that Sarah was now controlling the plane. Sarah then asked Samuel where their plane was at that moment. However, Samuel said that he could not see their plane on his radar. Sarah asked again which direction they should head, whether south or east, because the storm was already right in front of them and their fuel was only half left. Samuel finally suggested that they fly west to reach land. According to him, if they continued heading south, the plane's fuel would not be enough. Sarah and Jackson looked at each other because earlier Jackson had suggested going south, but before they could ask further, the communication with Samuel suddenly cut off. The plane controlled by Sarah finally entered the storm clouds filled with lightning. In the middle of that tense situation, they still tried to follow Samuel's earlier advice by flying west. Strong winds made the plane shake several times. One of the lightning strikes even hit the plane and made Jackson even more panicked. At that moment, Sarah instead increased the plane's altitude. Jackson, who was tense, immediately questioned that decision. He was worried that at a higher altitude, the situation might become even more dangerous. Sarah explained that she hoped if they flew higher, they could get out of the storm clouds and find clearer skies above them. That decision eventually worked. After struggling for a while against the turbulence, the plane managed to break through the storm clouds and fly above them. From there, they could see the sunlight. But before they could feel relieved, Sarah suddenly felt dizzy, possibly because of the pressure and the effect of gravity when the plane climbed quickly. A few seconds later, Sarah lost consciousness and fainted. Without control, the plane began to dive back down toward the storm. Jackson, in panic, immediately tried to wake Sarah up. He kept calling her name until Sarah finally regained consciousness. When she opened her eyes, Sarah was shocked because the plane had already re-entered the storm clouds. With the remaining strength and concentration she had, Sarah took control of the plane again. After struggling for a while, they finally managed to get out of the storm. They felt relieved because they had successfully passed the storm.
Where are we heading? Which direction are we?
Oh my God, Sarah!
However, that relief did not last long. When they looked at the fuel indicator, the plane's fuel was only about 5% left. In the middle of the panic, Sarah suddenly remembered that the plane had a backup fuel tank. She immediately switched the tank control to the reserve position and the fuel appeared to be full again. But when Jackson looked at it again, the fuel was actually decreasing very quickly. From that, they realized there was likely a leak in the fuel tank. Jackson finally made a bold decision. He would go outside the plane with whatever equipment he had to try to patch the leaking tank.
15 minutes.
Jackson, we...
Okay?
You could not even be able to open it. Do I have...
With his body tied to a safety rope, Jackson went out to the outside of the plane. The strong wind made it quite difficult for him to fix the leak. Several times, Jackson almost lost his grip.
Be careful!
But after struggling hard, he finally managed to patch the fuel tank. When the process was finished, the plane suddenly shook hard and almost caused Jackson to fall. Fortunately, his body was still tied to the rope, and Sarah immediately helped him get back into the plane.
Okay. Hey, you...
After he got inside, Sarah saw that Jackson's arm was injured. She immediately cleaned and treated the wound as best as she could. Even though things were a little calmer, their problem was not over. They still did not know where they were or which direction they should fly. Because the fuel was getting lower, they tried to reduce the plane's weight to save fuel. Some of their luggage and even seats inside the plane were thrown out. However, there was still one large weight left on the plane, which was Freddy's body. With a heavy heart, Sarah finally decided to throw Freddy's body into the ocean. It was the only way they could increase their chances of surviving.
Bye, Freddy.
Even after doing many things, the fuel kept decreasing. At that moment, Jackson suddenly remembered that Sarah had brought several bottles of drinks on the plane. Jackson explained that the alcohol content could also be used as emergency fuel. Hearing that idea, Sarah gathered the courage to go out onto the top of the plane to pour the drinks into the fuel tank. The extremely strong wind made the job not easy. When Sarah opened one of the bottles, it slipped out of her hand and flew away in the wind. Luckily, there were still 3 other bottles that Sarah managed to pour into the fuel tank. However, when Jackson was about to hand over the last bottle, he accidentally dropped it and the bottle shattered. After a fairly dangerous struggle, Sarah finally managed to get back inside the plane. Even so, the plane's fuel at least increased a little.
I hope you can hear this.
A few moments later, Jackson saw something in the distance. On their left side, there appeared to be a small island. They immediately felt very relieved because they had finally seen land. Without thinking much, they decided to head toward the island. But a new problem appeared. Sarah was not really skilled at landing a plane. She looked hesitant and worried as she tried to steer the plane toward the island. In the middle of that confusion, their fuel completely ran out. The plane was now gliding without engine power. Sarah still tried to guide the plane to land, but before they could reach the island, the plane crashed into the ocean and began to sink. Fortunately, they did not crash in water that was too deep. Sarah managed to swim out of the plane and reach the surface. She immediately looked for Jackson, who turned out to still be trapped inside the plane and unconscious. Quickly, Sarah dived back down and put a life vest around Jackson's neck. She then pulled Jackson's body up to the surface until they both finally got out of the sinking plane. With the remaining strength she had, Sarah swam while dragging Jackson's body toward the small island they had seen earlier. After reaching the shore, Sarah immediately gave Jackson CPR. A few moments later, Jackson finally regained consciousness. But when they started looking around, they realized something. The place they thought was an island was actually just a small sandbank that could be covered by seawater during high tide. That meant they were still in the middle of the ocean. Finally, they went back into the water and kept swimming, hoping to find another land. Jackson's condition was getting weaker, especially since the wound on his arm kept bleeding. Seeing that situation, Sarah could only pray and hope for a miracle. Without them realizing it, there was actually a shark below them that was starting to approach. The shark seemed attracted to the smell of blood from Jackson's wound. Their situation was truly on the edge of danger. But at that critical moment, a boat that happened to pass by saw them in the middle of the ocean. The boat immediately approached and finally rescued Sarah and Jackson, saving them from a situation that had nearly taken their lives.